Welcome to Science Coach to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovitz. In The Bear, a chef from the world of fine dining returns to run his late brother's dysfunctional sandwich shop. Our guest today is Professor and Chef Mark D'Alessandro, Director of Culinary Arts at CUNY's own Kingsborough Community College. Chef, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The beef's baker, Marcus, signs on early to Carmi's vision of better, then drives it right off a cliff of obsession, trying to create the perfect donut, following the NOMA guide to fermentation. When I hear fermentation, I'm thinking booze, pickles, and krauts. What does fermentation have to do with baking?
So specifically with donuts, there are two types, cake donuts and yeasted donuts. Cake donuts use a chemical leavening agent, which is either baking soda or baking powder for the most part. A yeasted donut obviously uses yeast, a fungus, to create leavening in the dough. A cake donut, again, is lovely in its own right. A yeasted donut out of a deep fryer, almost still warm, oozing, is a lovely and beautiful thing. The yeast in that recipe will go through a process of fermentation where it eats complex carbohydrates that are in the flour, which are basically just sugar molecules. And it creates carbon dioxide and alcohol.
So the whole thing that he was doing with the time and labeling all the things was figuring out how long he wanted his donuts to ferment?
I think when you said he went off the deep end, you really described it very well, because it's more than just the fermentation of it. So the thing that fermentation does in recipes beyond that leavening is it adds flavor through really acid. The carbon dioxide acidifies the dough. And acid is highlighted a number of times in this show, but you could tell that what he was doing is following some of those footsteps that Carmi did, that he knifed through all of those books, that he became very interested at the nauseam to which chefs went to find what they felt was the perfect recipe, the perfect preparation, the perfect ingredient combination in a donut.
He was in so many ways a scientist, though. And I liked him for behaving so maniacally.
There's a beauty to that because, again, what our goal is to produce the same thing every day in the exact same way. So if you have that donut on Monday, and then a month from Monday, and then a year from Monday, you're not going to say, well, what happened to that restaurant? They used to be so good.
Right.
And we do see a little of that as he's practicing the bread dough. And you see that Carmi makes those suggestions, you're close, it's not quite right, you need to, and then would make a suggestion. And as beautiful of a thing as that is with food, it's also a very frustrating thing because the environment matters. Because sometimes when the humidity is higher, the flour does not take up as much water in the recipe. And so many variations with food, it is a beautiful thing about food, but like I said, it can also be a very frustrating.
You can't get New York bagels in Montreal.
This is true.
But so that thing about information, so Marcus created a chart of information. He can reproduce those donuts because he did it in a scientific manner.
There is a science to it. It is a very inexact science, and there is far more science in baking than with savory cooking. Savory cooking is a little bit more about feel, a little more about knowing how the techniques and the machines that we're using to alter the food are interacting. Is the steak cooking too quickly? Does it need to have, does the fire need more air in order to raise the temperature? Things of that nature. Whereas baking, once something's in the oven, famously, you can't take it out and stir in a little bit more at something and fix it.
Sydney wants to add her own creation to the menu, and whatever else is happening on the plate she presents, the risotto is a big sticking point for Carmi, pun intended, because his first objection to Sydney's risotto is what that dish will mean for the dishwashers. What are we doing to rice in risotto that it matters to the dishwashers?
So risotto is made with one of between 20 to 30 different varieties of rice. And they are all very high in starch. Risotto rice is not rinsed. In fact, it is often toasted dry in a pan to increase like the nutty flavor in the final dish. But since you're not washing the starch off, one of the lovely things about risotto is that it ends up with this starchy, creamy texture just naturally from the starch that's in the rice. So what Carmi meant is that customers are going to eat the risotto, and anything that is left on the plate will stick to the plate, and the dishwashers in turn will not like scrubbing the plates because of that.
Because you maintain the starch, starch is just innately sticky?
Yes. When starch and water combine, especially when the water is hot, typically the starch molecules in this instance would not have the amount of time to properly hydrate and drink all the starch in, so it creates this, like I said, creamy mouthfeel without the presence of dairy cream or butter.
Poor dishwashers.
But delicious rice.
Madness reigns at the beef, and it takes a couple of episodes for Carmi to voice his deeper objections to Sydney's risotto dish. And what he says is that it needs more acid. Why acid?
Lots of food is unctuous in flavor. A steak is very fatty. A cream sauce sticks to the inside of your mouth and your taste buds. And we have other things in cuisine that you may say, well, that's why you take a drink after you've had the cream sauce, perhaps wine, perhaps beer, perhaps water, and it rinses out that unctuousness, that fattiness from the taste buds. Acid will do the same thing. Acid will help to pick up and brighten the flavor of a dish. Sometimes this happens through the addition of something as simple as lemon juice. It could be a vinaigrette. It could be an herb or a lettuce that is pungent and puckery that is added to the top of the dish that cuts through that fatty nature. So risotto, like I said, it's starchy and creamy on its own, but it's especially starchy and creamy if you add a little butter and a little Parmesan cheese to it. And then that acid that Carmi was mentioning would help to cut through it and make you want to eat another bite and another bite and another bite.
It feels like so much of what we're talking about is about balance.
Balance is very much a part of food. We as chefs are not only asking you to trust us with the food that we put on the plate, but we want you to want more, to come back again, to take another bite, etc.
When Carmi Risotto comes home to take over the original beef of Chicagoland, he hires Sidney Adamu to be his sous chef. What's a sous chef?
It's a great question. So the word sous in French means under. So a sous chef is the person directly under the executive chef, typically in most fine dining or French-style restaurants. They would be the chef in charge in the event that either the executive chef was not there on property, or perhaps in the office, doing accounting, counting things, any other type of work.
It is kind of remarkable. My sense of just not knowing anything about anything, but from the word sous chef, was that she would be cooking more, but she really does seem to be the senior vice president in charge.
There's a cruel irony to cooking in that the more responsibility that a chef gets, typically the more clipboards they have. This is not a broad brush stroke over the entire industry. Many chefs are working chefs, but in a fine dining establishment, in a larger establishment where you have a larger team, there has to be one, perhaps two, as you're mentioning with Sid, that those chefs are ending up doing more of the logistical work than the actual skillet, saute pan, knife cooking on a daily basis.
I think that's throughout all the arts.
Yeah, probably.
The original beef of Chicagoland is a mess, and we come to understand how a kitchen is an organism that must work together by showing us what happens when it does not. Trying to reduce the chaos, Carmi asks his sous chef to set up something called a Brigade de Cuisine. And Sidney seems surprised and a little upset by the idea, and I don't know why. What is a Brigade de Cuisine?
A French chef named Auguste Escoffier is credited for simplifying cuisine, and in doing that, used the Napoleonic army and the organization system in that army to create efficiencies. And very simply, it meant perhaps just putting pieces of equipment next to one another so those food items could be prepared more quickly, more efficiently, and be put on a platter or on a plate more simply than having that walk around the kitchen, up floors, down floors, et cetera. But also, as far as personnel is considered, it's almost an organizational chart. So a Brigade de Cuisine, when you mentioned sous chef and executive chef, it's an organizational chart where the sous chef reports directly to the executive chef. There will be other types of chefs in different establishments. It may be a chef de partie. It may be a chef that is only responsible for making roasted meats, and then they have their team underneath them. So it's an organizational system in the kitchen.
The show does not skimp on the portrayal of degrading cruelty running rampant in the restaurant industry. What advice do you give to your students about bullying?
It's a great question. We spend a lot of time on that in our curriculum. The cruel reality is that chefs tend to be perfectionists. We make the same thing every day, the same way, and have very exacting standards. And when a chef's name is on the wall and every plate represents them, they push those exacting standards upon their crew. And much as you see in The Bear, many of those crew members are eager to please the chef. So it's tough to say it is an industry where there is no bullying, everyone gets along, and everyone has a fair share, a fair shake. But the reality is it's not always like that. So how to deal with bullying? To give a bit of an example, I often have students who may be walking in my path apologize. I'm sorry, chef. And as quickly as I can, I pull them aside and say, please do not ever apologize to me for being. You are allowed to be in the kitchen. You're allowed to be in my way. If perhaps you make me drop something, fine, apologize. But I try to instill in students an absolute confidence that they are doing the right thing by being in a kitchen, following their dreams, and by making mistakes. My kitchen is a school kitchen. That's what it's there for them to come and learn techniques and, yes, make mistakes, scramble the eggs in a hollandaise sauce and have to start over. So for them to know from the time that they're in school that they are there giving their best and learning. So I try to inspire them with as much confidence as possible to withstand that part of the industry.
I think that's amazing advice cross-industry throughout life. I'm supposed to be here.
That's true. That's very true.
The beef has knife problems, lots of them, but let's just focus on one. Why is a dull knife more dangerous than a sharp knife?
You end up putting more pressure on an onion, let's say, to cut. So you are pushing harder on the onion. The likelihood that that knife will skip off of the onion and not cut as accurately as you want it to is quite high. And unfortunately, it will tear your finger when you cut your finger, as opposed to a sharp knife, which cuts very efficiently. You need less pressure. The chefs always say, let the knife do the work or let the tool do the work. But a sharp knife also creates a nicer cut on the skin if you were to cut yourself, and it heals a little quicker.
In the very first episode, the angry crew at the beef disrespect Carmi's $325 Yoshimi Echizen carbon and Karachi steel knife. Looking at all the forging and sharpening details of this particular knife, I'm like amazed. Does a chef have to be part blacksmith also?
In essence, all a chef needs to be very good at their task is an efficient tool. The knife doesn't necessarily make the chef better. A chef needs to know how to use a knife to cut an onion. They need to know how to sharpen a knife to do their profession. And I demonstrate to the students all the time. I pick up the same knife they use and cut the chicken and hand them the knife back and say, it's the same tool. There's no difference if you see a chef with a knife that costs as much as half of my wardrobe or one that is inexpensive.
In The Bear, Sydney has a great resume. but can she cook? And I have been to Chef D'Alessandro's end-of-term extravaganza featuring tastings from Kingsborough's pastry students, and everything they made was good. But some of the offerings were workmanlike expressions of the recipe, while others were brilliant tidbits of explosive yumminess that danced around in my mouth. So what's the difference between a person who can cook and an artist?
You can't teach someone to become an artist. As a chef, that was probably the thing that I was least capable at. I was very good at, and am very good at, executing a recipe many times to an exact standard. This topic really does present food as an A, capital A art, or as a lowercase a art. And what I mean by that is capital A art is something that is just totally irreproducible. You see an opera, it is different Monday than it is Tuesday.
And people like that it's different Monday to Tuesday.
Of course. It serves a purpose for someone to feel something introspective. And food can do that. And that's one of the most lovely things about food. But that's not the way that many chefs look at food. And I think that there is a lot of that in cuisine, with both, are we looking at a capital A art or a lowercase a art that someone is just reproducing the same thing over and over again, day after day, through that Brigade system.
Turns out Sydney is more than just a good cook. She is a capital A artist. She's also good with numbers and understands how to run a business. So in your program, how do you prepare artists for the nitty-gritty of the restaurant industry?
We spend a lot of time on this also in our curriculum. We have courses that are very specific to quantitative components that are definitely in every part of what they do in the kitchen. And what I mean by that is if you have a recipe that calls for 125 grams and you need to convert that to ounces, even though everybody probably has a device on them somewhere that can tell them the answer very quickly, they need to know how to convert recipes, how to turn a recipe that yields 18 muffins into one that yields 1,830. They need to know how to accurately price food items. We have courses throughout the curriculum that are either specifically on that or add that to the daily production, where we present the food to the students and say, this is what we bought for this class of 18 students. Here are the prices that we paid. If we bought a case of butter for this class, how much does the 4 ounces that you need in the soup cost?
Wow.
So it is definitely a part of our curriculum, but moreover, definitely a part of the industry.
That's a lot of math. That's a lot of fractions. And you're doing fractions in two systems, aren't you? You're doing English and everything's French, so you must be doing a lot of things in metric also. Oh my God.
The benefit that I tell students is that there are 4 things that exist in culinary math: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Nothing more than that.
No calculus.
And I pull out a calculator that cost 99 cents 17 years ago at a dollar store and say, this will get you through it all. So it appears vexing, it appears very challenging, but once you see that it is simply those 4 operations, right, no trigonometry, no calculus, hopefully it assuages any of the doubt that they have that they can do it.
In the Bear, Carmy trades vintage denim for meat, and in a very important plot point, his late brother Michael bought the less economical small cans of tomato sauce. Watching the show made me think about how much buying goes into cooking also. So do you teach your kids about shopping?
We do. We have a cost control course where that is a main component. We have a wonderful purchasing agent in the department whose office is quite accessible. So often, if they have specific questions, they can go and see the purchasing agent. They see the food be delivered, and the food comes in the back door. And when they see a bag of carrots that they couldn't even lift, they understand that there are economies of scale in the purchasing that happens in restaurants. That's not to say that that's how all restaurants operate. Simply, what if your restaurant is on 4 wheels, even 2 wheels, as you see many food carts, instead of a brick and mortar? Sometimes the purchasing changes. It may be that you are sourcing the purchasing out yourself at a warehouse store or a specific chef store. But the ideal way is that it's wholesale purchasing, and students do see that and see it very contextually in our program. The canned tomatoes. Obviously, there's a twist to this because of the money. But I've seen chefs write recipes specifically because a can of tomatoes is whatever, 8 ounces in that instance, and perhaps for the benefit of their staff, who's very good at opening a can, 8 ounces of tomatoes, squishing it into the pot and making the sauce, as opposed to a 16-ounce can, which may be only 10% more than the 8-ounce can by price, but putting it in the walk-in, putting it in the refrigerator correctly. It could be that there's something like that behind that size of can, but
So a lot of variables in cooking and how things go together. I just remember an earlier conversation and hearing you say something that you were trying to get this bit of fine dining ingredient so that your students could experience that. Did you get a chance to focus on that fine dining element for the students?
we do. Kingsborough is just an amazing campus. We have a beautiful location at the very northern peninsular end of Coney Island. And we run 2 courses simultaneously, a front of the house course and a back of the house course. Quite simply, the front of the house course serves the meal, the back of the house course prepares the meal. We have both luncheons and dinners. Sometimes in a certain semester it's a lunch, sometimes it's a dinner. We hold multiple types of themes, whether it is an a la carte, you would come in, traditional restaurant, get a menu, I would like this for this course, option B for the second course, etc. We hold banquets, we hold buffets, so that the students get the best opportunity to see most of what they would see as far as service is concerned in the restaurant industry, of how a restaurant works. And we definitely saw that in the Bear, how there is a definite cadence, a hum, an electricity to how that restaurant runs.
The employees Carmen inherits from his late brother seem to be cooking on instinct. Their system is the way we've always done it. But Carmen and Sydney slowly win the crew over to the world of order and information with their consistency and delicious outcomes. You must see this transformation all the time. Somebody who just has a desire and a passion to cook. How do you turn that into a chef?
What we're teaching in culinary school is not necessarily intimately how to express yourself through food, although many of the students are there for that. We're also teaching you at the same time how to do that in an industry that expects the same thing over and over again every day, whether you've had a good day or a bad day, you want to do it or not, and so on. So there's a balance between what is your actual job function, and we have to give students the perspective of both.
Money, and very specifically costs and debts, hang over every episode, both for the restaurant and the individuals. And there's a lot of jokes about who trained at top culinary schools and who went to DeVry. As a professor of the culinary arts, do you worry about sending your artists into the world covered in debt? Absolutely.
I'm very proud of what we do at CUNY. I'm very proud of the fact that it is public education. It is accessible to as many as we can possibly make it accessible to. I'm a product of a community college in culinary school. I find that, humbly, culinary school is really best situated in a community college. Our goal at Kingsborough, CUNY's only culinary arts degree, is to prepare students for industry or to prepare them for more post-secondary education. One of the most special things about CUNY, but also very specifically Kingsborough, there are so many systems of support within Kingsborough to help students get the supplies they need, graduate on time, all of the different things that we can do to support them financially, emotionally, et cetera, while they're there. That network exists. We literally push the students up. The reality of culinary arts, the reality of food service, is that we are doing our best to make those living wage numbers. and knowing that I'm preparing my students for minimum wage work. Our goal is to do our best while they're in our campus, in our program, to help them make the connections that they can through internships, through other types of industry connections, to become as employable as possible, or again, become ready for more post-secondary education, but have the best skill set they can, and again, with the least debt possible. When you think about it, we are in the kitchen executing at a very, very high level food that is in high demand, a product that is in very high demand, typically for those who have an amount of disposable income and a level of life, a lifestyle perhaps, an economic mobility that perhaps those in the kitchens do not. But I don't think there will ever be a point where we say, aha, we're at it now where they're earning a living wage and things have righted in the industry. I think there's always a push to make that more economical and more favorable for those that work in the kitchen.
I think it's wonderful to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And we're also out of time, but well done. Well done.
Thank you very much.